Today's topic is going to be understanding verbal communication, and it is also going to introduce you to the concept of academic writing. Now, before we speak of academic writing, we need to understand what we do when we speak or write. Speaking or writing entails exchange or communication. So, what do we understand by this concept of communication? Communication is a process by which information, ideas, thoughts, feelings are all transferred from a source to a receiver. Now, there are many phases of this concept called communication, but very broadly and very generally, it falls under two categories. One would be verbal communication, the other would be non-verbal communication. Verbal communication encompasses oral communication and also up to a certain level of written communication. Non-verbal communication includes other forms of communication such as body language, facial expressions, tonality, etc. Now, verbal communication may be and oral communication. In this lecture, verbal is being defined as to do with orality rather than the written word. As before, we had mentioned that verbal communication may include some written communication, yet for the purpose of this module, we are going to limit ourselves to verbal communication or oral communication, and of course, written communication. What are the key differences between, we've been talking about verbal communications and written communications. What are the key differences or what sets them apart? That is very important to know. Verbal communication does not require a preparedness. You don't have to be prepared to speak or to even write something, jot down something in a very hurried fashion. It may be extempore. That means you're totally unprepared and some idea is given to you and you have to speak on it. I'm sure a lot of us have had experiences of this kind of extempore speech when we were in school for our debates, etc. It can be something on the spur of the moment, but written communication would presuppose a preparedness. So it has to be necessarily more structured, logical, and overall a kind of argument that can be properly set forth. It cannot be just a knee-jerk reaction to a situation. It cannot be just something you speak on the spur of the moment. That would be verbal. But when you're writing it down, it reinforces the idea of cohesiveness and cogency at a higher level. That is what I want to draw your attention to, that it is not we are saying that whatever is verbal has no cohesiveness or is not a cogent argument. That is not true. It can be cohesive and cogent, but the cohesiveness and the cogency will be at a lower level. Verbal or oral communication, as we are talking about, refers to a source speaker and a finite number of listeners, whether it be in the midst of a small group or a public gathering. So the number of listeners is always contained. But written communication, on the other hand, may have a larger recipient group and may include any number of people who may have direct or indirect access to the written text. Different examples of oral communication. This is what we are coming to now. Intrapersonal communication. What does that signify? It involves your own personal self-talk. Sometimes we talk to ourselves and not just for anything. We are trying to work out an argument. We are trying to think of something. We may have a self-talk situation or an inner dialogue. Sometimes we have monologues, and you have seen in plays and all that, many monologues that have been used. So this is one example of intrapersonal communication, which has to be necessarily oral. The other one would be interpersonal. This involves one-on-one conversation or small groups. That means dialogues, two people speaking, speaker A and speaker B. Speaker A says something, speaker B listens, speaker B responds, speaker A listens. So this kind of one-on-one conversation would be an interpersonal oral communication example. So you're speaking to a friend, a colleague, or sometimes in today's world, you will have noticed you send voice messages. These voice messages are also examples of oral communication that goes through your phone. Then small group communication. This would be a kind of conversation for a group in gatherings, in meetings, etc. The other one would be public or mass communication. This communication is at large gatherings or public places, conferences, public rallies, events. This kind of a situation would be an example of oral communication that takes place. Different examples of written communication. Now we come to the other side. What is this written communication? The act of transferring and exchanging information through the medium of written words, symbols, letters, alphabets. The goal of written communication is to disseminate information in a clear and concise manner which will be accessible for a long time. This is another major difference between oral communication and written communication, the longevity of what has been said. Oral communication will be lost to us after some time, but written communication tends to stay for a longer period. Examples of written communication, they can be various kinds, and we have subcategories over here: personal, business, creative, and academic. Personal writing. Now, personal writing, what is personal writing? This may be in the form of letters, notes, journals. These are a means of exchange of information, but not necessarily exchange of knowledge. So we can write notes, which we can use for ourselves. We can write letters to family members or friends, and we can maintain a diary or a journal where we jot down things about ourselves. And this is one kind of personal writing. Personal writing is usually not meant for general public use. The next point that we would cover would be business communication. Business writing. We have been talking about the fact that this module that we have, this topic today that we are discussing, is academic writing. So you will have noticed that we are now talking about the various kinds of writing that you have. We had personal writing, now we have come to business writing. What is involved in business writing? Reports, annual statements, financial statements. You must have noticed that every company has to publish every year an annual general statement, of their situation, how many people they have, how many people are, employed, and then you have what is their corpus and how much money, has been expended on company issues, etc. All these details are given in the annual statement. So this is part of business writing. Official letters. Of course, nowadays people do not write official letters anymore. We have started depending on emails mostly, but then official letters or hard copies are still very much in vogue and used with all kinds of business practices. So professional emails, official letters, another way of business writing. And newsletters. Sometimes companies and institutions and various corporate entities will bring out newsletters talking about their company, and that is something which is a part of business writing. Another kind of writing that you had from your childhood. You were asked to write, write a poem, write a prose piece on something, So fiction writing, that is creative writing. Fiction, poetry, non-fiction, essay, all these you write, essays you write about yourself, about your parents. Sometimes you would write an essay on your family. That is creative writing. That is not part of academic writing at all. So then what is academic writing? Academic writing is when you write very formally and the purpose is to exchange knowledge and scholarship. Hence the two words you see over here, academic writing. It is not talking about creative writing. You have written, poems, etc. That was creative writing. This is now you're moving into academic writing. So this is to exchange knowledge and scholarship. So this is very different from the other exchanges of information that we have referred to before this. How many, forms of the various different kinds of forms of academic writing do you have? Thesis, articles in journals or articles in magazines, research findings, books, and essays. So what is the purpose of academic writing? You will say, I'm very happy writing my poems. I'm very happy writing short stories. And why should I think of academic writing at all? I mean, academic writing, how is it necessary and why must I learn the skill of academic writing? And now I will move on to this idea, why we need to have academic writing as a tool that we must know to impact our education. One may be an acclaimed scientist or a doctor or any other professional. Someone may undertake experiments to find vaccines, medicines, or philosophical theories or literary theories. These are all professionals who may be involved in their own domain knowledge. But if a doctor finds, an experiment through which he finds medicine for something, if he just keeps it to himself, will society benefit? No, it will not impact the rest of society. If these remain within the personal knowledge domain, it does not impact human society. When these are expressed through the written text, they reach a wider audience and ultimately help humanity. Just think if those people who get prizes for, chemistry or physics, if they kept their theories only under their own heads and they did not discuss this, they did not write them down in a very logical, cohesive, and clear fashion, would we have access to them? No. And if we did not have access to them, then mankind would have lost out on so much of knowledge base. Academic writing, thus, is the mode through which isolated work, great inventions come to the public domain. Therein lies the importance of academic writing and why one must have this skill. The purpose of academic writing is what we have been discussing. Knowledge without the skill inherent in academic writing would thus be hidden behind closed doors of scholarship. I hope you understand what I mean when I say the closed doors of scholarship. Scholarship is one point of information and knowledge gathering. But if that is not shared with the rest of the world, then that remains in a very, very confined state. So to share that, what one needs is academic writing. To put it down in legible, clear, concise, cohesive, properly structured argument so that the rest of the world can read that and then accept it and go forth. While sharing some aspects, journalistic writing is not considered an example of academic writing, as its purpose is mainly to inform about current affairs rather than increase knowledge. So this is another reason why we find that academic writing is a very, very specific area which we all need to learn about. Let's have a quiz. I will ask you a couple of questions and let's see if you can give the answers to that. This is all from our discussion that we have had so far. Why is academic writing important? Second, why do scientists need to know the tools of academic writing? Third question, when a physicist writes a book, is it academic writing? When a poet writes a poem, is that academic writing? This is the last question in the quiz. Now, why is academic writing important? It is important because, as we discussed just before the questions came up, that otherwise knowledge would be confined to the person who has thought of it or the person who has come up with some kind of an answer to a major problem that assails humanity. So academic writing is important to make scholarship available to the rest of the world and humanity. The second question, why do scientists need to know the tools of academic writing? You would say that the chemist can sit in his room and do mixtures and he would be doing his job. But if he only did that, would you and I know about it? We wouldn't know about it. We only come to know about it when he puts it down on paper through what we are defining as academic writing, and then only we would come to know about it. When a physicist writes a book, is it academic writing? Yes, because he is putting all his scholarship in a very logical, cohesive, clear, structured pattern in the book. So that is definitely academic writing. When a poet writes a poem, is that academic writing? From the discussion that we had before, we have come to know that that is creative writing. It is not academic writing. So with that, we come to the end of the quiz and we move over to the next part of the discussion. The major types of academic writing that we have. And here I have four types of academic writing that you can speak about. One is descriptive writing. The second would be analytical writing. The third would be persuasive writing. And the fourth would be critical writing. Now, academic writing may be descriptive, but has to be firmly grounded in fact that may be corroborated or based on earlier study which has been validated by other researchers. So it is not just description that makes it into academic writing. There is a bit of literature that it has to corroborate, and it has to be proven and through an earlier study and validated by earlier researchers. I want to describe something does not necessarily make it into academic writing. Descriptive academic writing will discuss fact-based knowledge domains. Its primary purpose is to provide facts and information. So the major thrust is on reporting on available information and often summarizing it. In analytical academic writing, the key purpose is the interpretation of facts and available information, not simply describing it. So here you have to interpret. That becomes important. That means come to certain conclusions, draw conclusions from what has been described. Organization, examination, and orderly presentation of the research is a key aspect of analytical writing. May be analytical when it studies data and interprets it. Scientific reports. You study data and you interpret it, then that becomes analytical writing, academic writing. While sharing most of the key features of analytical writing, academic writing is considered persuasive when it argues the writer's point of view with reference to other available information. That means you are analyzing it, but you are also persuading the reader to believe what you are arguing about. So if you are proposing something, if you are putting forth a point of view, then you are persuading or trying to persuade the reader onto your point of view or the writer's point of view that you subscribe to. So essays are an example of persuasive academic writing. To continue with the major types of academic writing, unlike persuasive writing, critical academic writing acknowledges and discusses other viewpoints apart from the writers. That means here there is going to be a collated amount of information. When academic writing focuses on various information available on one idea or related ideas, it is the most important aspect of critical writing. When you find that people are working on their PhD thesis or they're writing their dissertation, you find that they not only use data that they interpret, they not only describe the idea that they have thought about. So there is description, there's analysis, and of course there's persuasion, because there is one point of view that they are trying to project and they are trying to utilize that in order to persuade the reader. But they are also critically looking at all of these things put together. It is the most common form of academic writing in universities, in graduate and postgraduate programs. And the examples that you would find would be research papers, and as I mentioned earlier, dissertations, reviews, and critical analysis. We have been speaking about what is academic writing. We have been speaking about why academic writing is important, but now we must know what is academic writing. And the first most important point is the writing must be your own. You will notice that I have drawn attention to highlighted must, because it is important to have your own writing. What are the other features that we find common to academic writing? A formal style, that means an elevated style, not a style that is common, colloquial, or casual. What must you include in academic writing? Scholarly information, not what you assume to be the truth or what you feel is this, but what you find from other people's scholarship, research findings. You need to pay attention to literature that has already been there on the topic that you're working. So presenting a viewpoint through data-based, proof-based information. What you cannot present in academic writing is feelings, assumptions without fact checks. So features of academic writing would be different from personal writing or creative writing. It has to be factual and verifiable. The tone will be formal. So let us not get into the habit of writing, hey, let's catch up sometime, which is, very informal and casual in tone. This cannot be used in academic writing. You have to use a formal tone. So the same sentence that casually you would say, let's catch up sometime, in the same kind of sentiment would be better phrased as, it is necessary for us to meet in person. This is the difference between informal, casual, colloquial style to the kind of formal, elevated style. Language needs to be consciously chosen. So do not use words that do not fit the context. It may have specific terminology. So when you are using words that are definitely part of a particular subject domain, Stick to the terminology. And one must avoid bias at all points. Connected to scholarship already available on the topic. So the writing that you produce must be part of a continuum of scholarship in that domain. And then you have that your work should add to the available knowledge in that particular field. So what academic writing does is to communicate scholarship. And this brings me back to how I began by saying communication, which is very important. We were talking about oral communication, we were talking about written communication, and then we focused on communication that is part of the academic scenario. Communicating scholarship in a formal, elevated style and with reference to available information on the domain that the writer is focusing on. So now we will have another quiz for you. I will ask the question, what is academic writing? This is the first question. What is academic writing? The second question would be, what would be the tone of academic writing? The third question will be, will academic writing be emotional? And the fourth question is, will academic writing be imaginative? These are 4 questions for you, and I would request you to quickly answer them. To answer the first question, what is academic writing? We have discussed it is, the written expression of scholarship that you want to communicate to the rest of the world, to humanity. So that is academic writing. And to come to the second question, what would be the tone of academic writing? The tone has to be formal, elevated, serious. The third question is, will academic writing be emotional? And we can definitely answer that by saying, no, it cannot be emotional. It is scholarship, it is research-based, it is based on data, so it can never be emotional. It has to be logical, structured, and clear in its argument. Will academic writing be imaginative? No. Imaginative writing is creative writing, so academic writing will not be imaginative. What is the process of academic writing? Now we come to this. The first process of academic writing is ideation. The first step is to select an idea or topic or formulate a hypothesis, and this is the pre-writing stage. It can be on the weather in a particular region or on the health standards of a part of the globe or the poetic style of Shelley. For scientific research, academic writing might begin with a hypothesis and the idea for an experiment you wish to conduct to test the hypothesis. Step 2, research and literature review. So this is the second step. This is the research step. This is the stage to collate information already available on the topic or the idea one wants to write on or previous research conducted on this topic. In this stage, it is critical to research proper sources for your topic. Conference proceedings, peer-reviewed papers, research journals with strong credentials are good sources for factual information and references. Sources can be primary sources, documents which are first-hand information, or secondary sources, writings and research which interpret from first-hand information. Step 3, planning and outlining. The next step is to plan out your writing and create a basic outline or structure of your writing. Start with the main points of your writing assignment to create the basic structure and then detail out each part in a step-by-step hierarchical manner to create an organized write-up. This is called an outline and helps guide your writing as it develops. Step 4, Drafting. This is the stage of writing out your idea in full paragraphs and sentences. It is an iterative process and may involve going back to your outline and changing it as your idea evolves through writing. Step 5. Revising and editing. After the first draft is finished, it is important to go over it again and again, rearrange and edit it to make it more concise, grammatically correct, and supportive of your main argument. Remember to critically evaluate your writing from the perspective of an outsider reading it. Remember to cite your sources and references properly when using ideas from other sources and research. Common referencing styles are APA, MLA, or Chicago style. It is common to have multiple drafts before your final write-up is complete. So, to sum up, we started by saying that communication is the most important aspect in our lives because we communicate at various levels and through various media. Now, communication means taking information from one source and transferring it to another source. Communication can be verbal through words, which can be oral or written, and of course, communication can be written. Now, we started by saying that for today's discussion, we have interpreted verbal communication as oral communication. And from this, we moved on to that so many kinds of communication we can find that are there in our present usage. Personal, business, creative, and of course, academic writing. When we came to academic writing, we defined it as that medium or that source from where we take information and communicate to the rest of the readers. Now, this is very important for us because if we did not write them down in a logical, formal manner, information and scholarship that individually we may possess would be contained within us individually. So, to benefit the rest of the world, we need to write down all our thoughts of an academic nature. That is important. Not all our thoughts, general, but of an academic nature. And what does academic nature imply? That it is knowledge-based, it has to do with a logical expression, it has to do with information that we have gathered through very diligent research, and it has to be validated by other research that is already present on the given topic. So all these together help us to have what we know academic writing to be, which is why it is very important that whatever we do, whatever our chosen field may be, we cannot escape the idea of academic writing because all our knowledge and all the domains of study and scholarship will only be useful when they are written down in what we term the academic format.